Okay, welcome everyone. We are thrilled to launch our Culture and IP webinar. We've been working on this for quite a while, and it is good to always get these events going. In this case, doing something on Zoom again. While we have enjoyed doing a lot of our face-to-face events, there's still a lot of sense sometimes we'll do things online because not everyone can attend in person to some of these events. So in this case, here we are online again. And I'm going to get things started and then turn it over to my colleagues on the A-Stars. But I'm Sean O'Connor. I'm the faculty director of the Center for Intellectual Property by Innovation Policy, otherwise known as CIP². And I'm also a professor of law at the George Mason University Antonin Scalia Law School. We started planning Culture and IP because we had been looking at a lot of the events going on in the world, and we knew that there are some interesting discussions about thinking about the nature of a system of intellectual property that in some of its forms, and some of its most well-known forms, started in European nations in the modern period, say from the 1400s, 1600s on. And so it has certain historical legacy features to it that then may or may not map well into different regions, different cultures, different ethnicities, religions, et cetera, around the world. And so it's high time that we start having those discussions. And we have enjoyed working with our colleagues in other institutions, such as the Institute for IP and Social Justice, who have been doing a lot with the IP Mosaic conferences, and also the people who have been doing the Race and IP conference. And so there's a lot of interesting discussions now to be had in this area. And so we thought that moving to something about culture and IP could cover perhaps an area that has not been explored as much in the context of these other events going on. I do want to give a shout out to our managing director, Joshua Kresh, who really focused in on a lot of this early on and helped us to frame this conference. You'll in fact be starting to hear from Joshua quite a bit more in the coming months as we're going to be expanding his leadership role at CIP². We're very excited about that. So Joshua has really helped us to think about some of this. We've also, a lot of the affiliates that we've worked with over the years had a lot to add in this space. And then we put together a very nice planning committee, modeling after a lot of European institutions and other institutions where they'll do a scientific committee for their conference. So you can see in the materials, I'm sure somewhere, mentioning the planning committee, and you can see all the people that did a lot of hard work to plan the panels and to think about everything that we would cover. Now, I also want to mention, again, my colleague, Professor Senda A-Stars, who has been with us for many years, runs the Arts and Entertainment Advocacy Clinic at the law school and teaches many other classes with us as well, and has been doing quite a bit of scholarship. You'll be seeing more and more of her work coming out in publications currently and in the coming years. And so Professor A-Stars has been our director of copyright policy for a very long time. And so a lot of this conference then was her organizational and planning leadership. And so it's come together in quite a great event that we'll do. I also want to mention right out of the gate, most of you have probably interfaced with Christina Pietro and Mary Claire Durrell, who are incredible staff who keep things running at the center. As we go through the conference, if you have logistic and other issues, reach out to Christina and to Mary Claire, who can help you with those. Myself, Sandra, and Joshua are also available if you have issues, although we're not as deeply steeped in the logistics, so that may be better for Mary Claire and Christina. Okay, so all that, I want to now turn it over to Professor A-Stars. And again, I'm just so thrilled that we're doing this event. It's been a long time in the making, and I know that Professor A-Stars has a lot of comments now to help us think about framing this event that we'll be doing today and tomorrow. Professor A-Stars?
Well, happy belated World IP Day to everyone. I am pleased to welcome you from wherever you might be joining us. This event is divided into 4 discussions that explore different ways cultures interact with IP or present analogs to the concept of IP. And throughout the event, we will also have as a lodestar the effect of IP and its analogs on historically marginalized communities and also women. Today, we're going to explore how various religions view and use IP or analogs to it first, then move to a discussion of Indigenous peoples' cosmologies, Friday, we will begin by examining and challenging the traditional boundary drawing of IP, and we'll ask why some communities and expression or innovation have historically been underrepresented. We'll there probe how IP systems and their analogs can serve as a gate opening rather than a gatekeeping function. We'll end the day Friday with the observation that IP has sometimes been misused against creators to injurious ends, and we'll focus our discussion then on specific measures that are being taken to address these concerns and ensure that greater participation in the IP system can be gained by marginalized creators. Some of these approaches are addressing issues in the IP systems themselves. Others are focused on the larger justice system surrounding us who work in the IP systems. Sean has already done a fabulous job thanking our staff and thanking the members of the International Steering Committee who helped us with the big picture planning. Their names are listed in the program website, but special thanks really have to go to the members of the committee who volunteered to plan the panels. And those people are Dr. Miriam Markowitz-Bitten, who is professor at Bar-Ilan University School of Law, Tarika Carrington, who is VP of Legal Policy and Copyright Counsel at the Copyright Alliance, Tabrez Ibrahim, who is Associate Professor of Law at Lewis and Clark Law School, Dr. Jessica Lai, Associate Professor at School of Accounting and Commercial Law at Victoria University of Wellington, Teherangawaka, and Dr. Bhamathi Vishwanathan, who is Faculty Fellow at New England Law. And thanks also to our sponsors and to our institutional partners, especially to our sustaining sponsors, the Copyright Alliance, MPEG-LA, Motion Picture Association, and NBC Universal. I'm going to take a few moments and indulge in my privilege as planner of the conference, one of the planners of the conference, to say a few words about also some more esoteric matters, maybe. I hope some of you noticed the image on the invitation, and if you didn't, it's behind me on the slide. And it's a reproduction of a color woodblock print by a Japanese artist, Toyonobu Ishikawa. It was created in 1741, and the title of the work is Hanging Poems on a Cherry Tree. And a brief explanation of the process and the history of Japanese woodblock printing will give you an idea of why we chose it. The style of woodblock printing that's represented here is known as ukiyo-e, which translates to pictures of the floating world. Now, the term floating world originates from a Buddhist metaphor that refers to the impermanence of human life. And during the Edo period in Japan, the term came to refer instead to the hedonistic pleasures people enjoyed. And artists depicted a diverse array of fleeting pleasures in these prints, including those that we enjoy in nature. Unlike paintings that were available only to the aristocratic classes, the colorful print images were possible to reproduce in large quantities. So this made them popular and attainable to the merchant classes as well as common people. But in order to quickly produce and distribute prints to meet popular demand, it required the collaboration of artists together with engravers, printers, and a publisher. Publishers were in charge of judging the market and deciding on the theme for a print or a series of prints. Artists were commissioned by publishers to design and draw the desired images on paper. And once an image was drawn, it was delivered to the engraver to prepare the printing blocks. Printing blocks were created as follows. The artist's drawing was delivered on thin, translucent paper, and it would be affixed face down to a wooden block, and then the lines of the drawing were traced through the paper with carving implements, and the artist's original drawing would be carved away and destroyed as a result of this process. And the end result was essentially a carved negative, with the lines in the areas that would be colored in raised in relief. Printing required skill, but perhaps mainly a great effort and a great attention to detail. To create a print, ink was applied to the surface of the woodblock and paper was laid over the top of the inked board and then rubbed with an implement that made the pigment adhere to paper to create a print. The first block carved was called the key block. and it was used to make a black and white proof. This proof was sent to the artist for approval, and so the artist could apply the colors to be used in the polychrome work in the places where they should appear when all stages of the printing were finally completed. Polychrome prints were made by using the colored proofs to carve separate blocks for each color, and these could number up to 20 blocks. And the corner of each color block was then cut with a register mark in order to match it with the set of blocks that it was to be used with in order to print an image and to facilitate proper paper alignment. And the register marks were unique to images and to block sets in order to enable the printer to print many layers of color from different blocks on the same sheet of paper with precision. Reproductions could be made, and sometimes those numbered up into the thousands, but you could only make as many reproductions as were possible as long as the carvings in the wood blocks held up, and those carvings were sometimes quite delicate. Works were distributed bearing the artist's signature and the publisher's seal. But since the artist's drawings and the proofs used to carve the blocks were destroyed both by custom and by the process of carving the key blocks themselves, there were natural limits on the size of editions as well as built-in guards against unauthorized copying. So from this brief description that I've given you, you can see how circumstances like trade relationships, community norms, and practical limitations of equipment can serve to set up expectations and practices in a community of artisans for how work will be created and credited, and who will exercise creative control over aspects of production and be responsible for its distribution. And these practices can serve as analogs for IP protections where copyright or other IP protections don't exist, as was the case in Japan when this particular print was created. Moreover, it's interesting that historians tell us that the advent of woodblock printing also influenced the development of culture in Japan by quietly disrupting the regimented class stratifications that existed in the Edo period. Because woodcuts were a mass market entertainment, and they became available to a broad swath of the population. They brought new, albeit unofficial, power to the publishers, who were actually of the merchant class, not the upper ruling class. And by extension, these new commercial outlets and the broader recognition that came with them also brought commercially and culturally impactful results to the artists themselves. So this image raises the question, how do IP systems and their analogs influence culture and vice versa? This particular image caught my eye for other reasons as well. To me, images are very interesting. Images and how we interpret them interest me because I'm the daughter of a visual artist, and I've worked with many other visual artists in my role as a clinical professor. And I recognize that we often see and read images through the lens of our own experiences, and we might assign to them meanings and messages that artists don't intend. Some, particularly contemporary artists, welcome this creative interpretation that viewers make of their images, and they may invite viewers to be part of the process of giving a work meaning. But in other contexts, like where the work of a creator who has been historically marginalized is then freighted with new meaning without the artist's permission, such acts might raise questions of wrongful appropriation. And of course, there's also the tradition of artists drawing inspiration from other artists and from other cultures. And so referring back again to these woodblock prints, many of the European Impressionists greatly admired Japanese woodblock prints, and they incorporated elements of what they learned from observing the Japanese aesthetic into their own painting. So think about Claude Monet, Edgar Degas, Mary Cassatt, Vincent van Gogh. All of them were inspired by this choice of natural subject matter, the application of unusual perspective, and flattened compositional style that was typical of woodblock printing. And the term Japanism even emerged to describe woodblock prints' prominent role in Impressionism. But sometimes inspiration crosses the line into appropriation, and in our discussions over the next couple of days, we'll probe where those boundaries lie and how to ensure that we celebrate and honor rather than suppress and distort the speech of those innovators and creators we admire. So, no doubt, I projected my own agenda onto the image when choosing it for the conference invitation. For me, when I was planning an event exploring analogs to IP in different cultures, this work created centuries ago by a Japanese artist of a person hanging poetry in a cherry tree suggested a question: what conditions are needed for culture and for innovation to take root and to grow? But I'm sure that's not what the artist was thinking when he painted the work. The image also made me think about the ways in which we deliver and receive messages. The woman's chosen mode of communication is almost unbearably fragile and risky. I wondered about her communication, as I often do about my own communications, whether she was heard and properly understood by her intended audience. And the image, therefore, seems suitable to use to invite you for a discussion that I hope will also encompass consideration of the conditions that are best suited for communicating and for receiving knowledge, and how those circumstances vary, speaker to speaker, listener to listener, culture to culture, and how might we hear and understand one another better. So I want to say one more thing and close. And so given the theme of our discussions this afternoon, which include a panel on Indigenous peoples' cosmologies, it seems appropriate to me to include in these remarks a land acknowledgement statement. And I recognize that in recent years, such statements have become so common that they're now actually being criticized by some Indigenous leaders. And they're being criticized as merely performative, because these critics note that some statements are not tied to the activities or to the places where gatherings are held. Other critics note that many places have been home to different Native nations over time, so it's improper to acknowledge only one tribal nation in a statement. And some Indigenous people note that Indigenous people no longer live on Native lands, and statements often fail to take account of that history. So since we're gathering virtually, we could take the easy route and we could simply sidestep these controversies and not make a statement at all. But that seems like it wouldn't be in keeping with the spirit of our gathering. And it also seems like in the spirit of inquiry and of sharing of experiences that I hope we'll foster here. I'd rather invite our panel on Indigenous peoples' cosmologies later today to give us their comments on this topic. And so I offer up a humble attempt at a land acknowledgement that seeks to account for some of the critiques I just referenced. And as it happens, I am lucky that George Mason University has a formal land acknowledgement statement, which I can partially rely on. But since our gathering is both online and also international in scope, Mason's statement doesn't perfectly align with our conference activities. So I've freelanced it somewhat. So we begin by gratefully acknowledging the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we each reside individually, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their homes wherever we're joining from today. And on behalf of the host from SIP Squared, as we host this conference from the place George Mason University occupies, we give greetings and thanksgivings to these Potomac River life sources. To the Doeg ancestors who Virginia annihilated in violent campaigns while ripping their lands apart with a brutal system of African-American enslavement. To the recognized Virginia tribes who have lovingly stewarded these lands for millennia, including the Rappahannock, Pamunkey, Upper Mattaponi, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Nansemond, Monacan, Mattaponi, Patamomic, Nottoway, past, present, and future, and to the Piscataway tribes, who have lived on both sides of the river from time immemorial. May we honor the ancestors we acknowledge today by celebrating the creative and innovative spirit that animates all people and cultures, striving to honor, respect, and secure rights and obligations to innovators, creators, teachers, and custodians of culture in ways that will promote flourishing for marginalized communities, and by forging bonds of friendship through sharing our academic scholarship with each other.